I wanted to originally. I wasn't going to do a Christmas Carol one this year, partly because our high ability groups are doing something next year, but also because I've done quite a lot of stuff on it. And the thing about Christmas Carol is, you know, the big thing is Scrooge, and I've done several on Scrooge, which again you can always find on the YouTube channel, and about how he develops and how he changes. Particularly, my big thing about the idea that the thing Scrooge has is that he's a caricature, right? And that's what I think a lot of people miss when they're writing about him. I think it's what most filmmakers miss is the fact that they that's why most films are unsuccessful of it, even though it's the most filmed story ever. They get the right idea. I think you get an awful lot of actors who want to be Scrooge, like they want to be Hamlet, and they want to really show off their acting chops, but it doesn't work because Scrooge isn't a real person. He is a caricature. Okay, he starts off the meanest man in the world. Within the space of one night, he's the nicest man in the world. There's nothing realistic about him. Okay, so I wasn't going to do anything so much about him, and then it occurred to me that quite a few of the other texts that you could do instead of Christmas Carol have had questions on the use of setting, and it's never come up in Christmas Carol. So I thought to myself, well, first of all, they could be doing that. And then I was thinking, well, actually, it's another text that sometimes can be tough to work at the highest level. Because again, like Inspector Calls, it's got a very obvious message behind it. And writing about setting and the impact of setting is a way of potentially moving yourself up into that more conceptual level 6 area. So that's what I want to focus on here today. How Scrooge uses how Dickens uses setting, and he really does use it very, very carefully. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take kind of thematically in general, through a few themes of the book and how he uses setting to explore those. Start with the obvious one. Start with Christmas. What it's all about. Okay. Dickens' picture of Christmas throughout the book is consistent, really, isn't it? It is a happy time. It is a family time. Okay. It's a time to do with food as well, judging by the horrendous long lists of food he always gives us. But that means that people's houses quite often are very, very significant in terms of a show about our expectations of Christmas. Okay, let's take a start point here by talking about a section that people often don't really think about. When they think about Belle, they think about the broken off engagement. But don't forget, straight after that, even though he doesn't want to, Scrooge is forced to then go and see Belle later on in life. In fact, actually, 7 years ago, we know because it's the night that Marley dies, in her house with her family. It's essentially this is what you could have won, isn't it, for Scrooge? But what we want to really look at is how that description is done. And one of the key things here is he does, a bit like Fred, he doesn't portray her as living in luxury. I think because that wouldn't work. Half the point was that Scrooge had money and she wasn't that interested in that. She wanted affection. So I think to then put her in a really, really posh, glamorous house would not work. So it's made very clear, a bit almost like the anti-Inspector Calls, if you remember what we said last week, that the room is not particularly pleasant, but it is comfortable. It's not particularly posh, but it is comfortable. It's not large, it's not handsome, but full of comfort. And so if you consider that as a setting for what is meant to be his ideal, okay, that tells you quite a bit. So if you're writing about Scrooge, you're talking about how he used to be, what he has become, maybe what he lost out on. The idea that this is essentially what he's working towards, or what he should be aspiring to, is important. That comfort is associated with Christmas and with game. In stave 3, one of the first things that the ghost does is take him out onto the streets. It's one of those moments where, if you remember I've always got a thing about the ghost of Christmas present. Like I've only said before, I always think he's a bit of a dodgy character. You stop and think about it. I mean, think about it. What's he wearing? A single green robe, nothing underneath. I mean, that's not really healthy, is it? That's not good. Um, at the end of the whole chapter, two children come crawling out from underneath it as well, which is pretty disturbing. And in this section, which always bothers me, when he sees some argument on the streets, he takes his torch and he sprinkles some of his special powder over them, and suddenly they're really happy. I think this guy should be arrested. Anyway, the thing about the streets when it goes on to there, Dickens does not concentrate on a kind of a description of place, of, what beautiful buildings they are or how the streets are clean or anything like that. He's not interested in that at all. What he's interested in is stuff. That's what he's describing. That's what he's doing with the setting. He's describing all of the things that are around. That ridiculously long list of food. I mean, 2 pages that, you're never going to reread again if you did read them first time round, because they are just 2 pages of lists of food that are around. But if you do kind of look into them at all, you'll see that it's especially fruit that he seems to be going at. I mean, remember, although our big friend, the Ghost of Christmas, does also sit on a throne of food. Pretty weird in itself, especially considering it's made of roast meat, of it, which he'd just slide off, wouldn't he? Just, and all that grease, that green, that'd be worse. That green thing would be see-through, wouldn't it? Pretty quick. Anyway. But again, think about how he's using this idea. He's saying to us, right, go out on the streets. People do their morning shopping. Remember, that's what they have to do in those days. We don't have fridges to keep food in, so they get the food on that morning. Out they go on Christmas morning to do their shopping. And we are full of fruits, of exotic fruit. Just into very exotic ideas, things that don't, they wouldn't normally have. This is a time where he presented a London that doesn't exist any other time. Food and fruits that don't exist at other times. He makes sure it stands out as somewhere different. Whereas with Bell's Home, it's all about comfort. It's all about somewhere where family come together. In this case, it's all about the special nature of it. Now, as well as Bell's Home, he goes to Fred's, of course, in that, and that's in Slave 3 here. So, unlike Bell, where it's the past, it's all about here. This is his, core around various houses at Christmas. And yes, the Cratchits and other, I'll come to the Cratchits later because they go to something else, effectively. But he goes to Fred's, and it's very, very significant because, of course, that's where he was invited to go himself, and just dismissed it completely. And he has a great time there, right? And when you look at the detail of it, and again, I encourage you to go away and look at the detail. Once again, you don't get much of a description of the house. The place itself is not actually that significant. Just like with Bell's Home, it's the people who are. Now, in Bell's Home, like with the Cratchits, it's about family. It's about family being there. Again, if you remember in Bell's Home, the description, it's another example where we get the narrator going off on one. The narrator starts going on about how much he'd have liked to have been there. But with Fred's house, it's all focused on enjoyment. They go from one thing to another. They don't really talk about the food that much. It's there, but it's all games. It's all games and enjoyment and laughter. Remember, it starts with the sound of Fred's laugh before he even sees the place. Okay? So, in terms of these three and portraying Christmas, he's not interested in the physical state of a place. It is what is there, who is there. That's what he seems to be trying to get across to us, so that he can give us the alternative. Now, always remember with Christmas Carol that Slave 4 is not future, it's yet to come. There is a distinction there. It's yet to come because, of course, it might not come. And it follows immediately on from ignorance and want. And if you remember that whole thing there, ignorance, that child has doom written across its forehead, because if we continue to ignore the plight of children like that, then that's what it will lead to. And then what does he do? He goes on and sees the doom that it's going to lead to. Stage 4 is literally a consequence of ignorance and want. Do remember that, okay? And the interesting thing with stage 4, if we're looking at setting and Christmas, you see, is there is no Christmas. Now, we know, because of the way this works, that everything we see is happening at Christmas. Everything we see through it, it's always Christmas, Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, or in the Christmas presents example, he goes through to 12th night. But everything is still happening Christmas, but there is no mention of Christmas at all. And at the beginning of stage 4, we go to the city of London, if you remember. And there's plenty of description there. Again, not so much of the physical buildings or anything like that, but of what's happening in the place, of what the setting is like. And the focus is on people obsessed with time and money. They're looking at watches, it says quite often, their pocket watches constantly, and they're even jingling money around in their pockets while they're standing there. They are focused purely on time and money, and they are incredibly selfish. Whereas here it's with others, family, enjoyment. Here they're very focused on themselves. There is no mention of Christmas at all. They are purely there to make money. So we see that as a contrast. Okay, it's essentially a dystopian vision of Christmas where people don't care and the rich are just making more money. Okay, so setting to give you a sense of Christmas. It's not about the buildings, it's about the people and the behavior that goes on there. Now, probably the most interesting thing to go into is Scrooge's life through settings. Okay, I'm going to take 4 examples here. I'm going to take the school that he sees in when he goes back into the past, 2 in stage 1, his counting house, the counting house, his workplace, his own home, and then I'm going to look at the graveyard that's shown to him in stage 4. Now, these are places where the physical description does work, and it's interesting that's associated with Scrooge. It's a lot of the idea that things around him are an extension of him or what he's been through. And so they help us to understand this change in this behavior. See, the school, as we know, the point about the school is first, it's the first point we feel empathy with him, okay? Or at least sympathy, if not empathy, right? Where we're seeing how he was alone, how he was sad. But it's easy to forget that that school is an awful place. It's a run-down school. Again, we read between the lines, and it's something in a book that is kind of telling you how to think a lot of the time. Sometimes you do miss the fact that Dickens can be very subtle. That whole thing about Dickens' father, right? It's not Dickens' father, Scrooge's father, mentioned once by his sister, by Fan, saying, "Oh, he's so nice. He was so nice the other day." Like that's the only time ever. He was so nice the other day that I actually wasn't too scared to ask him if he could come home. Which reveals an awful lot about their family life. And the fact he's been sent away for Christmas, every Christmas, repeatedly for years. And the place that's chosen. This is not a pleasant environment. But you can look again at some of the details in here and what it shows you. The dull red brick of broken fortunes. Damp and mossy walls, windows broken, gates decayed. It's neglect. The setting, the school is neglected. Exactly, obviously, as Scrooge is. And if you look closely and do your own analysis of it, you can see with things about the broken fortunes and maybe even the sense of how moss is being used and the repetition of broken, you can see a little bit more depth in there for how he's being neglected. You can draw that detail out yourself. The idea that there are animals, fowls running around everywhere, that nature has overtaken everything with grass coming through there. And then at the end, the room itself that he's in, the long, bare, melancholy room. And again, I'd note to you the use of that word melancholy. By this stage, we've already had it used about Scrooge. Remember, he took his usual melancholy meal in the usual melancholy tavern, okay, on Christmas Eve. It's a word that's associated with him, that overriding sense of sadness, right? Like, it's not you're feeling sad, it's like you've got almost a disposition to be sad. And how, as it goes further, a lonely boy is reading near a feeble fire. And there again is another central image of the book. Fire, warmth, light. Remember, save one where Scrooge, we'll see in a second, does not want to have much of a fire. Okay? Particularly for Bob Cratchit, to have one coal. We see how when we go to Fezziwig's, just after this, he has a roaring fire going. You'll see it throughout. The sense of fire as hope, as warmth, is a part of what's going on here. And it's a feeble fire. It's like his fire is barely there. His fire inside is barely there. Well worth looking at in more depth. Now, if we then go back, if that's setting him up as he was, now where is he now? Well, back at the beginning when we see him in the counting house, we get this description of the place and the setting around it in particular, where we get this repetition of weather, which we'll come back to in a minute, the cold and the fog. But people outside who are wheezing, beating their hands on their breasts to keep warm, stamping their feet. A sense that the cold of Scrooge is infecting the setting around and the people as they come past almost. Remember, this comes just after that whole idea of Scrooge carrying his own cold around with him. Okay? The darkness prematurely coming, even though it's just gone 3. The fact it had not been light all day. The way that even the candles in the windows of the neighbouring offices, and remember this is from the perspective of the counting house, are like ruddy smears on the palpable brown air. Now, it's not saying the warmth and happiness isn't there in those offices. It's saying that's the perspective from here. That's what they seem to be. We get the sense that the fog, so significant here, is actually coming into the houses. I mean, it did apparently. I suppose it was partly because people, you didn't have as close fitting doors or whatever, but apparently, and because it was smog as well, it would actually come into the houses as well, in Jekyll and Hyde as well. But it's a sense that is invading the place, okay? And the fact that you can barely see the houses opposite. They become phantoms, like the phantoms that he sees in stage 1. The whole setting is very, very clearly showing his situation of darkness, of radiating that nastiness to others around, as we're about to see. And it doesn't get any better when he goes home. This is where, again, we've got the melancholy dinner in the melancholy tavern, and the way that he spends Christmas Eve in there. If you think about Christmas Eve and the delight of it, he just sits and reads the newspapers and then does some work and his banker's book and then goes home. And remember, of course, this is juxtaposed immediately with just before that, the only bit, funnily enough, in the book that isn't from Scrooge's perspective, where Bob Cratchit goes running off and goes down that slide 50 times, to enjoy himself, Cornhill, when he leaves work. You don't remember that bit? Look at it. It's very, very important. The only time we leave Scrooge's perspective, and it's direct juxtaposition. Bob having a great time to celebrate Christmas. Scrooge, dreadfully dull. But when he approaches his house, it points out, again, we've got the gloominess, very similar to before, okay? And this strange image that we have here of the idea that this house that he has doesn't fit what's around. As though it says, as though when it was a young house, it was playing hide and seek with other houses and then got lost. Okay, way out again. It's a very strange, complex image, but again, it gives a sense of the past before we get there and the happiness of it and how things change over time. The gloomiest and the dark, even though Scrooge knows every stone of the yard, he has to grope with his hands. Okay? And it all hangs about the gateway of his house. It isn't subtle, but it's there. Okay? Before we even get to the whole darkness of the inside and the way that he keeps it dark, because darkness is cheap, as I'm sure you remember. It gives us that clear understanding that just like the counting house, this is not a home. This is a place of darkness. This is a place of nothingness, of melancholy, really. Okay. And then if we take it a bit further on and we do go to the graveyard, right at the end, it's a very short description, but it's a very interesting one again, because it's like the school. Even the graveyard he ends up in is pretty awful. Okay. It's walled in by houses. Okay. Okay, good, nice things like that, but it's like, you know, there's nothing open about it. Shut in, it's claustrophobic. It's overrun by grass and weeds, exactly as the school was. The growth of vegetation's death, not life. Okay, now, I mean, that's referring to weeds, isn't it? But what an image that is. The growth of the death of vegetation, not its life. The only things that are growing there are the things that kill the rest of the vegetation around it. And it carries on with the choked up with too much burying, with too much death. Fat was repleted appetite, a worthy place. Again, you say Dickens, it's not subtle in any way at all. But it very, very clearly said, even in death, he rests in somewhere that fits the unpleasantness and nastiness of what's going on, as though nature is almost trying to hide it away. So my thought is there, you see, you'll say plenty else about Scrooge's life, but the way that you could draw in some of those settings to show what Dickens is doing could definitely be something highly effective. And of course, who knows whether any of those are going to come up as part of your text anyway. Okay. The other thing that I'm thinking about is poverty. Now, one of the other past lectures which you can look up that I've done was very much about the sense of poverty. It's starting from the point of view that, I don't know if you're aware of this, that the whole existence of the book is because of child poverty. Dickens intended originally, what he did is he'd seen a report on child labour, right? On how people, because it comes to me, but it was, you know, like 9-year-olds working like 15 hours a day or something silly like that. And he was so upset by this report, he decided he needed to use his talents to write it. He was going to write an essay, a pamphlet himself. God, he didn't. But he soon changed that to the idea of, let's write a story. I'm better at fiction. Let's write a Christmas story. Okay, remember he was a journalist, so he would have done things, but let's write a story. And that's so all of it comes from the idea of poverty really ahead of Christmas. Child poverty in particular. That's why children turn up so much. Do keep your eye on that. There are so many issues of little moments of child poverty, not just Tiny Tim, okay? But, you know, there are children turning up all over the place. Even the carol singer, the whole point of the carol singer at the beginning, at the window, he chases with the, it's nothing to do with the fact he chases with the ruler. You look at it, and again, the detail comes in describing him as on the verge of death, gnawed by the cold, as a dog gnaws bones. Yeah, that's what he wants to show us. He wants to show us that there are kids suffering everywhere, streets and around. So when he goes to poverty, again, he is using these very well. Again, right at the beginning of stage 3, before he goes out in the streets, again, another bit that people miss, which is really, really effective here. He goes to these poor houses. I almost don't know how to identify it here. It's the first place the ghost of Christmas Present takes him to. And it's basically a bunch of houses that are clearly in a really unpleasant place, unpleasant area, because the description of them is of blackness, of gloominess, of smog. It's really, really awful. Okay. When he goes to it, I'll give you an example of, here's, I'm going to get it from in here. There we are. The house fronts look black enough and the windows blacker, contrasting with the smooth white sheet of snow upon the roofs and with the dirtier snow on the ground. Right? So again, the sense of the houses and windows blackness compared to the white snow, but even when the snow falls down to the ground, it becomes dirty and dark. It talks of the thick yellow mud and icy water. It talks of the gloomy sky and the shortest streets being choked up with a dingy mist, half thawed, half frozen. It gives a description of essentially what is smog as we would know it now. That it's like all the chimneys in Great Britain had by one consent caught fire, were blazing away to their dear heart's content. And sums it up by saying there was nothing very cheerful in the climate or the town. And then Dickens switches it around completely. And yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad that the clearest summer air and brightest summer sun might have endeavoured to diffuse in vain. And this is where he goes to this description of these people chatting away to each other in glee while they're clearing the snow off their roofs and playing snowball fights, throwing snowballs at each other and having fun there. He takes that time to show us, he is really showing us the horrible conditions that a lot of people are living in, right? These are pretty much slum housing, isn't it? And the way that the smog and, the darkness of London is affecting it. But he uses that contrast to show us the power that Christmas and good spirits have over poverty. Of course, there's the Cratchits bit, the longest episode by a long way. Christmas Carol is episodic. One of the great ways of remembering Christmas Carol when you're revising, by the way, as just a small tip here, is to see it as an episode, episodically. You see at the beginning the description of, Marley was there to begin with, introducing Scrooge, then the counting house, and then it's Fred comes in, and then it's the 40 gentlemen come in, and then it's the carol singer, something, and then it's Bob, then he goes home, and it's all small little scenes like this. The Cratchits is by far the longest. Again, though, it won't surprise you that there is very little description of the Cratchits' house. Okay? All their poverty comes through what they don't have, mostly the meal, and how they make good on everything. But one thing that always comes back to me that I think is effective here is when they sit around the fire to have a drink of punch or whatever, and they start using, he has to hand out the things to pour into. And it refers to the family display of glass. Now, that tells you something about his audience. I doubt these days any of you lot have a family display of glass. It was a very middle class aspirational thing. I grew up, my parents, I did not grow up, we were very lower middle class. My parents are both from very working class backgrounds. And they found their way up a little bit, and so they kind of are very aspirational, the working class. And we had a glass cabinet in our entrance hall with little things on display like that, and they weren't particularly great. And the family display of glass. So he's talking to his middle class audience. Here's what their family display of glass was: 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. Again, just like the thing with Mrs. Cratchit of the twice-turned gown, which I'm sure most of you remember. Yeah, this is the best example of how setting can reveal poverty. Okay, but also pride at the same time. They still happily display these things. They have something with them. Now, following on from the Cratchits is a thing I go on an awful lot about. Between the Cratchits and Fred is this little section that I beg you to pay attention to if you don't normally, where he goes to 3 different places. He goes to see the miners, goes there to see 2 lighthouse keepers, and then he goes out to sea and see people on the ships. And in each case, basically, it's people who are poor, isolated, away from what they're like, and still, in every case, the key thing is singing. Actually, right? They're all singing. But at the beginning of the miners bit, they go to a place, and this is so different from everywhere they've been before. They're out in the middle, because it would be Yorkshire or somewhere like that, right? And it's very clearly described as a bleak and desert, as in deserted moor. There's nothing there. And the weather is described horrifically as well. We described lots of stone lying around everywhere, rude stone, as he calls it, as in things aren't growing around. That's what's there. And then there's this description of the sun, going down like an angry eye as it goes to there. Again, look at that detail yourself at some point. It's a brilliant description for what is one of the most poor groups of people that he describes in any way. It shows you how they are surviving in a setting where they almost shouldn't survive. When it goes inside, and the old miner, because it tells you there's 4 generations there, and the oldest one is singing to them. It points out you can barely hear his voice over the wind outside. Again, it's like they're battling with the setting that they're in. And possibly even more extreme, the poverty than that, is old Joe. Remember old Joe? Again, juxtaposition, contrast. This is immediately after those horrible city blokes, right? Stage 4, where we again see people at Christmas, no sense of Christmas, but in a very poor area. He says Scrooge knew it by its reputation, but had never been there, obviously. But the surroundings of old Joe's shop, I mean, old Joe's shop itself isn't particularly great. He hasn't got a front wall. A rag hanging down, serving as a front wall. But the description is really, really effective if you look at it closely. It describes the horribleness of the place, the ugliness of the place. Ways are narrow and foul, it says. But this is the one that sticks out to me. The idea that the whole quarter reeked with crime, smelt of crime. It smelt of crime, it smelt of filth, and it smelt of misery. I think Dickens does best is these descriptions that just literally lay bare, right, there's nothing worse than there could be. It's a horrible place. He did spend a lot of time, Dickens, going around and looking at these places to, again, try and get some inspiration so he could actually protest against them. But the surrounding just goes with the poorest people. Remember, the people who are scavenging so much that in the end, they take one of them takes the shirt off the dead body of Scrooge and sells it, and we're encouraged to see that there. Okay, so 3 key things, how the setting goes. What I'm going to leave you with then is one of the biggest aspects of the setting. If you don't feel you can use any of those, or you're not quite sure how to, the one you can definitely make the best use of is the weather. It seems simplistic, but it depends how you do it. Remember, stave 1, it's foggy, it's cold, and it keeps getting foggier and it keeps getting colder. And then it's more foggy, and then it's more cold, and it just builds like that all the way through. Fog, of course, remember, obscures things. So it's not seeing clearly. So it tells you everything about that idea, right? And then remember the purpose. And again, another one I think I've done is on the structure of Christmas Carol, which I think is very, very significant. Stave 1, remember, is essentially, well, stave 5 is stave 1, right? Stave 5 is stave 1 turned on its head. Everything that happens in stave 1 comes back in stave 5. Or certainly up until when he goes home. So here, the weather is made clear. It's clear sunlight. All of that fog has gone. Remember the fog that was coming into his house? It's all gone. It's blatantly obvious, but again, it's like the clarity of his head has spread around him. And the reason it spreads around him, and this is so important here, the reason it all spreads around him is because the point of the book is that it's not just about one person. It's one person's effect on everybody else. That's why everything's still cold, though. It has to be. It's Christmas, doesn't it? It's described as an invigorating cold, right? A cold that makes you feel alive.
Okay. So